Well, you are in the right place if you've been waiting to analyze the highlights of the week, and to give us insights today with us is Dr. Vantage, political scientist. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, there have been many developments over the week, especially the protests that we've been seeing, not just one protest, random protests happening, especially in the main city of Colombo, in Kolpiti, right at the junction where all the vehicles meet, and the times they pick aren't very convenient. This is really happening at the expense of the public, and you see them protesting, but it's for a good cause, they say. But there's also another faction who voice out their opinion about the inconvenience they cause on a day-to-day basis. What are your views on that?
Well, on the protest or the inconvenience?
Both.
Well, I think that I can't remember a time at which there have been so many spontaneous protests from so many diverse sectors in so many different places in this country.
Right.
And I think that's a symptom that something is not right with the way things are and the way things are going.
Right.
Protests are like a rash. It's a symptom of something else. So we've got to cure that something else for the protests to go away. I mean, nobody really likes being baton charged or tear gassed or having water turned on you with such velocity.
But interestingly enough, government MPs and politicians say that there is freedom of speech and people are okay to take to the streets, and we are not stifling them or making them believe what we believe in. And also, interestingly enough, we see politicians protesting at very safe zones of the country, like the parliament, outside parliament, zones that have been earmarked as places that are not suitable for protests.
Well, there were protests even during Mahinda Rajapaksa's regime. I mean, they used to come right up to the president's house and temple trees and so on and so forth. So there have always been protests, but never this many on so many different issues. They're not just sectors, for instance, not just the student sector. You have citizens in various provinces protesting about issues which are kind of municipal. Now, I ask myself why. My answer is that two things have gone wrong, and if they're put right, you won't have this kind of situation. Now, let's take the protests in the provincial towns or in the suburbs, not the ones where the students come in large numbers into the city center. Now, those are local issues. Why are there protests over local issues? I would say that if the local authorities' elections had not been postponed for so long on such skimpy excuses, those issues would have got resolved because they would have been manifested firstly in a vote at the municipal level or the Pradeshia Sabha level. I mean, many of these protests are about garbage and bus stands and something else and so on. All of this should come out in the wash, you know. If you have an election, then you have your guys or girls in the relevant local authority and they voice their discontent, and the Pradeshia Sabha or the municipal council then acts on that, and the issue is more or less taken care of. I mean, nobody really wants to come out onto the street and fry in the noonday sun, but they do. That's because they feel strongly enough and they feel that there's no other avenue. So I think it's really dumb to delay the holding of the Pradeshia Sabha elections. They should have those elections. Let a council or Pradeshia Sabha be elected, and then protests get channeled into safer institutional reservoirs. The second thing is at a national level. Now, you have a serious situation here. The last national election was August 2015, and the result of that was that the UNP and its allies got 106. The SLFP, campaigning under the leadership of Mahinda Rajapaksa and saying that they will not enter a national government with UNP, got 95. But On the morning after, you had
Yeah.
part of them unscrewed, fixed in with the ULP. Okay, that happened. That's not the point. The point is that you've got 51 guys on the outside looking in who should be the official opposition, but they're not the official opposition. What does it really mean? That means that they don't get speaking time in Parliament. I mean, they get some speaking time, but nothing like what they would be entitled to if they were recognized as the opposition. But they are the opposition because, as you know, Stephanie, in any multi-party democracy, the opposition is known as the alternative government. That is the guys who are going to be the government the next time there's a change, if there is a change. And there usually is a change. Now the TNA is not the alternative government. I mean, the TNA is not going to form the next government. It's the 51 guys who are in the joint opposition. That's going to be the next government. I mean, it might take 4 years, 5 years, 20 years, but it's going to swing from this present government to the next, to the other mainstream alternative. But that mainstream alternative has been deprived of the status and the role of the official opposition in Parliament. Therefore, discontent spills over onto the streets. Even if it's not the JO doing the demonstrating, when you have a sufficient number of representatives in Parliament designated the opposition, then people just go and pester the hell out of their MPs and they get them to speak. But when the people you elected are not the opposition and there's someone else who doesn't care about Saitan or whatever, then what do? You hit the streets.
Right.
Because you feel there's no alternative. And those two reasons, those are the reasons that these demonstrations are continuing. They will go on so long as you don't open up those valves.
But right now we are at a time and age where protests are more, it speaks volumes when it's projected in different channels, like on social media. We have different types of media that really gets people to talk and gives them a voice themselves. But we are so stuck in the Stone Age type of voicing out our opinions and expressing our sentiments, like protests, and this is all happening at the expense of the public at their own time, as in fuel charges take, and you see time being wasted on the streets. And is there any way the joint opposition together with the opposition can make this clear, that we can make our voices heard through a different channel? As in, why is politics so fragile, as in so static? It doesn't move from one place to another. We are still stuck in the old way of doing things. As in, is there any new way of doing this, as in, so that we can get the opinions across to the platform, across the board, so that we couldn't be an inconvenience to another person? As in, is there any way we can do this to voice out our opinions?
Have an election. I mean, the moment you have the local elections, the sooner you have the elections, then the steam goes out, because there's a build-up of steam. Let people vote.
Right.
It's not going to change the government. It's
so elections meaning the local government.
The local elections, they've been delayed for too long, and it's there are no
Why
excuses.
exactly is that happening? As in, is it because they want to buy time in order to?
Well, if you go by Asoka Peiris, who is a very respected senior civil servant, he was, by the way, the secretary to President Kumaratunga, if I remember right. He was a very senior man. He was in the final year when I entered university at Peradeniya. According to him, it's simply to delay. And he's come out and said it. So I'm afraid I have to take his views seriously. And that's not helping. The longer you delay in having elections, the more demonstrations there will be. And the more demonstrations there are, the less likely a foreign investor is, or even a local investor, to invest. So have the elections. Let it drain into the councils.
Well, we've got a lot of topics to touch on today on Vantage Point. Let's head into a short commercial break, and when we come back, we'll do just that. Welcome back. You're watching Vantage Point, where we celebrated the 69th Independence Day. How do you think Sri Lanka, where do you think Sri Lanka is right now when it comes to actually receiving freedom? Do we seem divided or united or both? Or can you really gauge the sentiments of the people at this point of time?
I think there's a sense of confusion and unease. I watched it live on television. I liked the parade. I loved the parachutists. And I listened very intently to President Sirisena's speech. I also watched the body language. And I saw that the President had grown in confidence. I watched the Independence Day over the last 2 years, and then the President seemed to be the equal of the Prime Minister and the former President. But this time he was clearly more self-confident, didn't spend much time with the PM and the former President. In his opening remarks, he didn't even refer to the former President. In addressing him, he referred to the Prime Minister and the diplomats, but he didn't mention the former President. So he's grown in confidence. And the other thing is that he didn't say one single word about a new constitution, or even about constitutional reform, or even about constitutional change. The constitution was not mentioned at all. Now, this is the 69th Independence Day. He could have said by next year we will have a new constitution or reformed constitution, or whatever. That's the main thing we're doing now. So, not one word, a conspicuous silence. Now, I have to come clean. I'm happy he didn't say it, because I think that with an economic crisis looming, or actually with an ongoing economic crisis, the nation shouldn't divert its attention to a new constitution. You have to manage the economy, and obviously the government is not doing that properly. But President Sirisena obviously did not wish to touch on the subject, which means that there are two views in government. Because the former president, who is a member of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, says, hey, we need a new constitution, and in fact, it's my old constitution, the 1996 draft, or 1996 to 2000, the successive draft. That's what's going to make a comeback. That's what this is about. They should have done it then, they're not doing it then, now they're doing it. This is the way to go. And the UNP says, yes, we need a new constitution, we are going to abolish the presidency. Why is anybody even talking about the next presidential election? There's not going to be one. And then the foreign minister says in Ethiopia, we are studying your Ethiopian constitution as a possible model, for Sri Lanka. But the president doesn't say a word about any new constitution or any constitutional reform at all on this occasion. So it tells me that there are two views, at least two views, at the highest level of the political leadership, between these three people, the president, the prime minister, and the former president, who has God knows what mandate to be talking about these subjects, because she doesn't have one, she's not elected. But there are obviously different views on this, and that's why the president was silent. I also noticed that he mentioned the LTT, and he criticized the LTT.
Right.
So I noticed that Mr. Sambandhan was not present in the tent. I noticed that Mr. Sumandaran was, poor Mr. Sumandaran, all alone. All of that was very significant.
So there's also been a lot of, reportedly there had been alleged death threats made at MP Sumandaran, and also there's also a lot of speculation of what's going on. There are shootings that are taking place in the country, a new gun culture that's spreading widespread, that seems widespread, and also MPs being posted a lot of death threats over the phone and through accounts, statements that were made by other LTT cadres of there being an orchestrated threat against them. In this backdrop, do you think the government should take a much stronger stand in curtailing this gun culture and making sure that people are safe in the country?
Well, the most serious is the attempt to kill Mr. Sumandaran. Now, I may disagree with his political stance, but Mr. Sumandaran is a Democrat, he is unarmed, and he has every right to take the stand that he wants. I mean, he's never spoken for Tamil, and even if he did, there's no reason, for somebody to murder him. And when it's clearly the Tigers, because they've been arrested and the plot is now known, it originates in Norway and France, according to responsible newspaper reports. And these are LTT people who have been planning to assassinate Mr. Sumandaran. So, what does that tell you? It tells you that the Tigers have not changed at all. It also tells me that though this is a friendly administration in terms of the ethnic issue, friendly towards the North, quite very liberal, and Mr. Sumandaran is somebody who has been pushing both for a federal constitution and for accountability, the Tigers want to murder him just like they murdered Neelan Tiruchavaram. And our friends in the West, the Europeans, are certainly not locking anybody up. Now the evidence is that Neriyavan in Norway and another group in France worked on this assassination plot. Now I can understand that they may be reluctant to grab Neriyavan, put him on a plane and send him to Colombo. But I cannot understand why he is not being questioned, why he is not in custody, and why those governments are not reaching out to Colombo and saying, what's the evidence, give us the evidence. These are supposed to be friends of ours. But that's not happening. And you cannot even say that there is some cruel Rajapaksa militarized regime and these poor LTT guys are just trying to resist national oppression. This is a very liberal government. And yet the LTT is trying to do what it always did. Now, the problem is, as the IRA once told Maggie Thatcher, you have to get lucky every time, we have to get lucky only once. What happens when the LTT manages to actually do something? Let's kill somebody or put a bomb somewhere, because they're obviously trying. And they obviously didn't care that if they killed Sumandaran, if they succeeded, that there would be a crackdown. So, what does that say? That says that the security net or the safety net in the North has big holes in it. The pullback of the military, I'm not saying the military should be back on the streets, but the rollback even of military intelligence, the removal of brilliant officers like Suresh Saleh, who cannot be accused of being a singular Buddhist chauvinist because he's not a singular Buddhist to start with. All of that has meant gaps in the safety net. And that has to be rectified very fast, because you never know what it will be next. It could be a bomb in Colombo. It could be an assassination attempt on the president. If they were willing to kill Sumandaran, they'd be willing to kill anybody. Mahinda Rajapaksa, Gotabaya, President Sirisena.
Well, we've come to the final few minutes of the program. Let's head into a short commercial break, and when we come back, we'll talk about world politics. Well, welcome back. You are watching Vantage Point, and I'm in conversation with Dr. Danja Tilaka, and right before the break we said we'll talk about world politics. Well, there are emerging political figures right now like Marine Le Pen from France, and also Trump, one of the newcomers into politics, is doing some, as the world calls it, bizarre things in world politics. especially trying to impose a ban on 7 countries, which no president has ever done before. He's bringing in his new immigration policies, which are quite stringent and quite punitive over Muslim countries, Muslim majority countries, even though the Trump administration denies it's not a Muslim ban. What's really going on in world politics, and is it a sign that it's going to be a unitary world altogether?
Well, the question is, how is it that figures like Donald Trump and Marine Le Pen, who were seen as kind of fringe figures, how is it that they emerged so strongly? One is the president of the most powerful country in the world. He's in trouble, but he's still the most powerful man in the world. And then you had Brexit. Who would have thought that Britain would exit the European Union? And now you have a very interesting showing by Marine Le Pen. I mean, she's come out and kicked off candidacy for the presidency of France. So, what's happening? How is it that positions and personalities would have been seen as, right-wing populists? The new term, of course, is alt-right or alt-right, the alternative right, not the old-fashioned conservative right. How is it that they are now making this strong surge? That's because the liberal or neoliberal globalized world order is in crisis. Societies have suffered from it. Nations, ethnic groups, communities, classes are recoiling. This is on the rebound from a long love affair with neoliberal globalization, and it's happening in many, many countries.
Or is it plainly because these political figures are really tapping into some of the sensitive sentiments of the people, especially even in nationalism?
Nationalism, everybody plays the nationalist card, but that works only in certain conditions. When things are bad, when things haven't worked, when you've tried this neoliberal integrated world order, and there's a pullback. Now there's a recoil, and that's why you have this phenomenon. It happened on the left as well. I mean, if you take Greece, Syriza, the victory in 2015, the rejection of the European conditionalities at the referendum in 2015, but of course the Greek government split, and the Prime Minister decided to go along with the European conditionalities. But that's the left-wing version of the right-wing version that you saw in with Brexit, and also in the Trump victory, and now with the rise of Marine Le Pen, and the crumbling of the socialist and centrist alternatives.
So is it a more experimental kind of resort, or is it just going to be a tangible, is it going to make a tangible difference, or is it going to affect change in the future?
I think it's a shift at the level of the tectonic plates in the world order. Something is changing. We are in transition. Now, it might not be a transition to the world as envisaged by Trump and Marine Le Pen and Nigel Farage and so on, but it's certainly a transition away from the neoliberal globalized world order that unfortunately some elements of the Sri Lankan government still seem to be wedded to. It's quite old-fashioned now. It's not worked even in those Western countries. People are turning away from.
Let's just hope that we can renew this hope day in and day out, and make sure that the world that life goes on, and
life will go on.
Life will go on.
And people will keep searching and experimenting, and there'll be new combinations.
And you know where to tune in and what to tune into. That's Vantage Point. If you want to know more of what's happening in the world order, and whether we are crumbling down or whether we have strength to go ahead, well, this is where you need to tune in. And if you want to post us your views, your opinions, you can send it all to Newsfirst.lk, and we'll make sure we'll bring it and discuss it here on the program. I'm Stephanie Lazarus. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us, and stay tuned next fortnight as we come right at 9:30 p.m. on TV1.